Hello everyone and welcome to this session of the Angular Meetup Online. My name is Marin and I'm a software engineer at This.Labs. Our sponsor today is This.Labs, your partners in more digital transformation. We specialize in mentorship, consulting, training and staff augmentation for enterprise organizations. Find out more at This.Labs, and here you can find also our Twitter handle. A couple of announcements before we get started. We also do these meetups on other framework specific topics, and we have also React and Vue. And this month we're having a React online, actually tomorrow. Then we're going to have on April 16 a Vue online. Basically we're going to be talking about the state of Vue. It's actually a cool topic. And then we're going to have another Angular online meetup on May 7, and it's going to be the state of ngRx. You just cannot miss that one. This month also we're having the JavaScript Marathon. There are some really cool trainings coming soon specific to Angular. Feel free to reach out to this.media Twitter account and ask any questions you have. Here you can see all the trainings we're going to have on this month. 1 hour to learn Angular, the best pro tips for accessibility in Angular, master PWA in Angular, advanced ngRx complex Angular state management, and easy Angular unit test in ngRx. So let's get start talk about today's speakers. First we have Stephen Cooper. He is a senior developer at G Research, a quant research and tech company, helping them leverage web technologies to their best advantage. Outside of work, you'll find Steven sharing his love for all things outdoors and his own little explorers. He's going to give us his amazing talk, ngTemplateOutlet, the secret to customization. It's kind of weird to present myself, but let's give it a try. Daniel is a senior software engineer at This.Labs, a company specialized in modern web technologies, designing and developing software to help companies maximize efficiency in their processes. He's going to give us his incredible talk, Accessibility for Angular Developers. Welcome, and I'm gonna leave it up to you, Stephen.
Thank you, and thanks for everyone for watching today. And I want to talk to us today about ngTemplateOutlets. Because I've come across this topic in Angular, and it made such a huge difference to my development experience, especially in the company that I was working for and for any other projects that I was working on. To set the scene for why we might need ngTemplateOutlets is you get into the situation where you start writing your first component, and it's a really nice, clean, simple component. And it does just one thing. And then you have a client come to you and say, oh, can you add this feature? And you think, okay, I'll just add a little bit of an extra input, say, and then it will enable the component to meet that requirement. And then another client comes to you and says, oh, can you make it do this as well? And before you know it, that simple component that you had is now getting really complicated. And I like to coin this phrase, you get to this point where you reach feature request fear. You're like, I can't have any more feature requests to this component because it's getting too complicated and testing it is already getting out of hand. And I got to this point in my current work situation. And that's when I discovered ngTemplateOutlets. And literally as soon as I found them, it solved all my problems. So whenever a feature request came in now, I could say, yes, I can handle it for this client and that client, and the underlying component remain very simple and clean. So that's what I wanted to run through quickly this evening for me. So we'll look at a reconstruction of how easy it is to get into this situation where your component is getting out of hand and overly complicated. And then looking specifically at customizing a component, a lot of the time, the first thing we head towards is, say, ng content or transclusion to be able to project extra details into a component. But we'll see and show how it's not always the right option. And sometimes it doesn't even work for what we're trying to do. So that's when we'll introduce ngTemplateOutlet, and we'll show how that gives us the power to completely customize our components without adding any extra complexity. So without further ado, let me introduce you to my clients. So this is client number 1, Ben, and client number 2, Joe. And after 2 weeks of lockdown, they're already becoming quite demanding clients. So this fits quite well with what we're about to discuss. So client number 1, let's see, he comes to me and he says, I love sharks and I want to pick my favorite shark. And I want to encourage him to maybe make his first web app. So I think, okay, we can make a simple selector for him. So it's like a drop down and he can pick his favorite shark. And that's quite straightforward. Before we look at the code, everything you see in an orange border will be in our parent component. So say that's our app component level. And then everything in the blue border is in the actual select component itself. So starting off with the select component, it's got one input, the options. So that's a list of strings. So the names of the sharks that we want to select. And then there's one output, an event saying when a shark has been selected. The HTML for it is you've got a button which works as the drop down, and then we use an ngFor to list out all the options in a list. So it's all quite clean, straightforward, nothing too complicated there. And then to use this component, we simply pass a list of sharks into the options. So that's from our parent component. And there we go. We've got our first shark selector. Client 2 comes along and he's learning to talk. And he says, I want to learn the names of sharks in Latin. So think, how do we add this feature just for his application? One approach that we could do is we could say, well, I could pass in a display function or like a callback so that client 2 can use that function to add in the Latin name that they want to display. So we update the template inside our component. So instead of just showing the option, we say display function, pass it the name of the shark, and then that can return a value. So then when our parent defines that append Latin function, so at least the Latin name logic lives in our parent, and we haven't put that in our selector, we pass in this append Latin callback, and you can see now the select component adds in the extra detail of the Latin name. For client number 1, we just don't pass in the display function, and in our ngOnIt logic in the select component, we just return a default value of the shark name. So both clients are happy, both of them work okay. But then client number 1 comes back and says, I want to know which sharks I can swim with, and I've made my own icon library that I want you to use. So he's come to us, he says, this is the feature we want. And we're a bit reluctant to use this library because it's likely to be big. But the way it works is it's a bit like Font Awesome. So you can pass it a name, and the name will be the picture that's displayed. So inside our select component, we can add in this my icon with an ngIf on the option, and then also the name. And in ngOnIt, if it's not passed in, we get it to return undefined so that it won't display an icon if this function isn't being used. So then in client number 1, we define this callback, pass the callback in. Notice how we're not using the display name callback, just the swim icon one. And then we can achieve this. So we've got a picture along with the name of the shark. But I think we should probably stop here and take a look at the state of our component. We've got 3 inputs now. We've got a display function. You could have a selected display function. You've got a swim icon, callback, and all of these are inputs and, I guess, API to this select component, which have nothing to do with the fact that you are selecting options. They're all display customizations. And our ng init is getting quite complicated as well as we set up the defaults if these aren't passed in. Now, you could move the defaults where you define the inputs, which would make the code a little bit cleaner. But still, the idea is the external API of this select component is very complicated. And then to make things worse, client number 2 angrily comes to us and says, why is my application so slow now? Why is it using up so much bandwidth when people are trying to use it? And we're just sitting there going, I thought I was having a nice day. So if we look at why it's so slow, we've introduced client number 1's icon library into everyone who uses this shared select component. So this is a really bad design decision because one client's feature is now sitting in the background, increasing the payload size for clients where this is never going to be used. So we need to extract that out of this shared component. So this is where you might think, well, I know with ngContent and transclusion, I can project, I guess, either HTML code into an existing template. But the problem we have here, if we just replace that with an ngContent and try and project it in, because we're working within a for loop, only the last ngContent will actually have something projected into it. And secondly, the ngContent has no idea which shark option it's actually being displayed with. So you've got no way of making sure that the right picture is shown. So we need something more powerful than this. And it was at this point that I was getting stuck Googling, looking for lots of articles, trying to find a solution, because I knew that what I needed was something like ngContent, but then it was also had to be aware of the context within the temp where it was being displayed. So you might be tempted at this point to say, well, I could just make a new selector. Client 1 could have his one with the icon library, and then the other clients, they could have their own ones. But as soon as you head down that path, you're going to end up with thousands, or maybe not thousands, but a lot of components, and they might be sharing quite a lot of complicated code. So if we can use one component, it would be a better option if we could. So yeah, don't just make a new select component straight away. So what do we need? We need to be able to pass a generic template into the component. So that means we need it to be able to support the Latin name, say for client 2, or we want it to be able to show a picture. And importantly, we want the component itself to be able to hydrate that template with its state. So by that, I mean, where we use a template for great white shark, the template should be aware that it's being used for great white shark. And so you can apply the custom logic to it. And luckily, Angular provides this for us. This is ngTemplateOutlet. It's in Angular Common, so everybody who's using Angular already has access to this. There's no external libraries to use. And this is how it works. So there's an ngTemplate tag, and this enables you to define, I guess, segments of HTML code and reference them as a template. So here we've created a template called myTemplate, which is just a paragraph, with a dark blue background saying my template. And then what you can do is you can use the ngTemplateOutlet directive. And here you can see we are attaching it to an ng container. You can attach it to any element. But the nice thing about ngContainer is that it doesn't add any additional, I guess, semantic nodes or HTML elements into the DOM. And then the way this gets rendered is as follows. The template gets replaced with a comment because it doesn't actually get rendered where you define it. And then where we had our orange div with the orange background, that's the same. And then instead of the ngContainer, you'll now see that the content of our template is now getting displayed where we applied the ngTemplateOutlet. So this is how we can use the ngTemplateOutlet directive to define a template in one location and have it displayed in a second. So if we go back to our first requirement, to be able to pass a generic template into the component, here we're in our parent, the parent component, and we've defined a ngTemplate called option template within the app selector component. And then we can use content child with the option template name to pick up that template from the parent app selector. So this is the code that you require. For version 9, you don't need to put the static as false anymore because that's now the default option. And then where we list out our options, again, you can see we've got this ngContainer with the ngTemplateOutlet directive on it, and we're passing it that option template reference. So what we've done here is we've defined a template in our parent that is now being used by the shared select component. So we've done our first thing. Now for the second step, for the component to hydrate the template with its state, that's where there's ngTemplateOutlet context. And this is the thing which gives ngTemplate so much power. So what you can do here is within our shared component, we are now saying, okay, where you display this template, give the template this context. And we're passing it via the implicit option, the option that is currently being displayed. So for every row where the template is being rendered, it will have the option injected into it. So that's the name of the shark. And then when you define your template in your parent, you can use this let syntax. So here we're looking at sharks. So we can say let shark, and then that gets bound to the option that is set on the implicit context, which then enables us to run client functions, which are then completely defined in our parent on the actual shark option. So we've achieved both of those two steps. So let's have a look and see how this can solve our problem. Because now we don't need to create a new component. We can customize it for every client using ngTemplateOutlets. So before, where we had this icon defined in the select component itself, we can now completely delete that, and in its place, put an ngContainer with this option template reference, and we give it the ngTemplateOutlet context of the option that is currently being displayed. So then instead of passing in the swim icon, we can get rid of that and define a template called an option template with let shark. And we can define the my icon at this level. So what we've done here is we've now moved this icon library only into client one's application code, and the shared component no longer needs to have any reference to it at all. And notice where we're defining the icon as well, we don't have to worry about using ngIf anymore as well. So it's not only saved the select component, it's made our template code here simpler as well. So client number 2 is happy and client number 1 is happy. And if we look at our final select component, we've now got a much simpler interface and API for it to be used. We've just got the input, or the list of options, and we've got a content child to pick up the option template, as well as the original select output. And for the template, again, it's now really quite straightforward, and we don't have any client-specific logic here at all anymore, because now it will just list through where we're using the ng container and the ngTemplateOutlet and ngTemplateOutlet context directives. So you probably will never need to change this code again, despite what features your clients might request, because this is all you need for a select component. So client number one, he has his icon library and the shark. Client number two, he just passes in a template which appends the Latin name. And we've got the exact same behavior that they had before, and using the same shared select component. And now client number one says, I don't like sharks anymore. I want to pick tractors. And so whereas before this might make you think, oh, I put all that effort into creating this selected component for him and adding on these features and causing these problems for other clients and making sure it didn't break all their tests. And now he doesn't want that anymore. He wants a different feature. And this isn't a problem anymore with ngTemplateOutlets, because where previously he used it like this with an icon library for sharks, we can just throw that template away and we drop in a new template, which is for tractors. So you can say the tractor name, stars, and a buy button. And that's it. We haven't had to change our select component, but we've produced a completely different visual output for our specific clients. And this is the power of ngTemplateOutlets. And I think once you've worked with them once, you start seeing them used throughout all the major shared component libraries. Like Kendo uses this a lot as one example, and many more. So it's a really powerful feature to understand and to use and to save yourself complicating your components. So hopefully I've convinced you to take a look at ngTemplateOutlets, and here are some of the things which might help you get started or that I've learned when I've been using them. So we'll work through these. So first of all, if you have an existing component, say we've got an existing select component, and we want to be able to add this feature into it, but we don't want to break all the existing use cases. So you can add in your content child to look for the template. And within the component itself, you could define this default template, which just takes the option and displays it. And then when you're defining your ng container, you can say template reference, or if that's not defined, use the default template. So you've instantly added this great level of customization to an existing component without the worry of breaking any existing clients. So you could then slowly extract more and more of the custom code from this select component, extracting it to the client code base instead. So that's a really good way to get started with using templates. Another thing to be aware of is you can pass back more than one option or more than one data object in the context. So here we've set the option as the implicit one, and you can also set the index property. So that would be the position in the select dropdown in our case. Now for the implicit, to pick that up, you can just say let shark or let car. And in both of these cases, when you're then using it in your template, shark will refer to the option or car will refer to the option. And if you want to target, say, the index property, you can say let ID equals index. And if it's not the implicit one, you have to name it explicitly. So that's why we've got let ID equals index and let pos or position equal the index. And then you can see we can use those in our template. So you can add as many name properties as you want, and users or in the client base can then use the let syntax to extract those and use them within the template. So that would enable you to write some code to be able to switch the color based on whether it's the odd or even rows, using the index as well as the chart name. And you don't have to stop at enabling people to pass in just a single template. You could have a selected template reference as well as the option template. And so you just simply define ngContainer and name the different template references and have multiple content children that you could pick up to use. So there's nothing stopping you having multiple ones, pass them in and customize different parts of your component. You can also share templates. So instead of using a content child, you can pass template reference in as an input as well. So here we defined our shared template outside of the selectors. And then using the input, we can pass the same template into multiple selectors. So this is another way of, I guess, reducing the amount of duplicated code you might have, because you can share templates across components. You can see we're passing the same shared template to 2 instances. And testing ngTemplateOutlets is not too difficult either. So here we'll write a test where we see if the default template is used or if a template that we pass in is used instead. So we've got our list of sharks. Before each test, you create your component and the test host component, set those up, and then you can test what the rendered output would be, whether it's using the test shark or in the default case, or if you define a template, then you can check that the custom has been added, which is what we put in our template. So there's no reason not to test ngTemplateOutlets either. So that's those quick fire tips. And as I was saying, this is loosely based on some of the work that I did at G Research, where we had this reusable select component, and it was getting more and more complicated as the users added more feature requests to it. But as soon as we introduced ngTemplateOutlets, it meant that we could simplify the select component and extract all the complicated logic just to the places that it needed to be. And it just freed us to be able to then be proud of this, I guess, select component and actually share it, because we weren't leaking out lots of implementation details of our client, because the select component simply became a select component. If you want to learn a bit more about that, you can check out the Angular docs, or I've also created a stack blitz with these sharks and tractors, so you can have a play with it hands-on and see how it all fits together, because I find sometimes that helps, I guess, get your head around it and see where making a change in a template will be displayed. So thank you very much for listening to my talk. So I think I'll hand back to Daniel unless there's any questions.
Thank you, Steven. Man, I love this presentation. Like, it helped me a lot. Before we started, we were talking about it, and this entirely changed the way I was building my reusable components. So you definitely, if you have a question or whatever, take this chance to ask Steven. And we're going to be waiting here in the comments for 2 minutes. If no one asks, we're going to continue ahead with the next presentation.
And I guess one of the things in this presentation is that these templates can be done dynamically as well. so I've had another test. I think I was doing it with Daniel actually, that you could have your templates defined in one component, and like they're like a component store, and have them injected at runtime. You could flick a switch and the templates swap out. So I know some people have used this to help them have mobile layouts as well as web layouts using these different templates. So when they see which, I guess, device they're on, they can change the templates on the fly. So there's quite a lot of powerful features, and I know Daniel himself has used it for accessibility as well.
Well, thank you, Steven. So we're going to get started with the next talk. We're going to be talking about accessibility. So hello everyone, thank you for being here. My name is Daniel Marin. I'm a software developer at this.labs, and I'm here today to talk about accessibility in Angular. I'm going to cover core concepts and a few practical examples in the time we have available. But before I start, I want to clarify that what I'm saying in this presentation is based in my personal opinion and by no means represents my employer. I'm not a lawyer, so if you need extra guidance, you'll need to seek for professional advice. Leaving that aside, so we have for today's agenda, we're going to be talking about the core concepts about accessibility, the standards that you have to follow. We're going to learn a little bit more about assistive technology. We're going to see how HTML is going to help us. We're also going to be talking about the role of Angular in the accessibility world. And we will end up with a few really simple demo. So before we start, I want to clarify what this A11Y means. I have had this question asked before. So basically accessibility is composed of 13 letters, and if you remove the A and the Y, you're left with 11 letters, and then if you put back the A and the Y, you have A11Y. And so since the 11 resembles so much else, we pronounce it like Ali. So for now on, I'm gonna, instead of saying accessibility, I'm gonna be saying Ali, just for so if you get confused. So let's get started by definitions. Now that we clarify what Ali means, let's define it. So accessibility is, or Ali is the possibility of using an object, visiting a place, or accessing a service. If you don't make things accessible, you're preventing users to consume your services. And that's not what we want. It's actually the opposite. We want to allow all users to use our apps. It's all about making the web more inclusive, so everyone can use it regardless of their condition. So disabilities are divided by types. There are plenty of them, but for this session we're going to cover the most common ones. Hearing disability, which can range from mild to severe in one or both ears, so basically users that cannot understand sound. We have also the motor or physical disabilities, which relates to some kind of weakness or lack of muscular control. We also have a cognitive disability, which is related to neurological, behavioral, or mental disorders. This can affect the way people perceive information. And visual disabilities can range also from mild to fully blind in one or both eyes. And there's also these illnesses in which the people cannot process color in the same way we all do. So, for example, colorblind people, they don't see colors in the same way that most of us can. But also, besides that, we also can divide disabilities by permanent, temporal, or situational. So, permanent, there are disabilities that will be permanently with the person. Like, for example, there's people that sadly is born with a lacking of a limb. Let's say they have only one arm. This could be also temporal. This is like a broken bone, so you could break your arm, and for that reason you just have one arm to work with. And finally, situational, which are the disabilities that are basically tied to what you're doing at the specific moment. So, for example, if you're holding a baby, you still are able to use a single arm, unless you're an expert parent like Steven, that probably he can still use both arms. What's especially interesting is that by helping one, we help all. If you provide keyword interaction to your application, you help the user that lacks a limb, right? But also the one with the broken bone, and also the one holding the baby. So this leads me to what I like the most about accessibility, and what made me realize that how important it is that accessibility implies usability. So if you make it easier for users with disabilities to use your applications, you're not just helping a small segment of your market, but all your users by giving them a better experience. So there are users like me, for example. I like to use the keyboard a lot, and if your application doesn't allow me, I just don't like it. So this is one thing that to have in mind, that when you help one, you help all. So why is this so important? Why do we start seeing so many people talking about accessibility? Well, so first of all, I think it's the right thing to do. We should not prevent someone from using our applications because of their condition. Instead, we have to use technology to empower all users to feel safe in the web. So this also increases sales. So if you're trying to convince your management team that they have to, so just explain to them this. And basically, according to something I read a few weeks back, only in the US there's 50% of the entire population suffers of some kind of disability. The number is huge. And I mean, this is a market that we're probably ignoring now. So I highly recommend you to go that way, improve it. And finally, reducing lawsuits. Once again, I'm not a lawyer, but if you follow international standards and make sure you're not preventing people from consuming your services, most of the time you're okay. So far, development companies are not being accused of being responsible for it, but this could change anytime soon. And we, as developers, have to be prepared in order to provide our clients with better applications, better experience that take into account accessibility. So they cannot blame us, because at the end of the day, if they hire a pro, we're supposed to know about it. So this is why this is getting more and more awareness. Let's talk about the available standards. There are more, but I decided to talk about the ones I'm used to. So WCAG, which stands for Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. This basically helps you a lot. This is one of the most important things you need to learn out of this talk. Then we have Section 508, which is a US specific law or policy. And finally, we have WAI-ARIA, or Accessible Rich Internet Applications. So ARIA is kind of scary, but we're going to see why it is so cool actually. So the standards. So basically, the standards help us as developers understanding exactly what we need to do. I think it's key to highlight the role of Domino's Pizza and how it helped web accessibility to gain more awareness. For those who don't know, Domino's Pizza is a big food chain that was sued by a blind user because he couldn't order through the application even with screen reader technology. After that, many businesses decided to take action and started improving their application's accessibility. This is amazing. I saw the news when it was on Twitter, and 1 week later, my boss asked me, "Hey, we need to improve accessibility today." So that's how it changed things and made it more important for a lot of people. Making applications accessible is no piece of cake, especially for big and mature projects. There are experts out there saying that it can worth millions to take huge applications and turn them into accessible applications. Although this can be true depending on the application, If you build your application thinking on accessibility since the design step, since you start designing, this is not going to be an extra cost for you. Instead, if you build your application having that in mind, you're going to be so much better. And I think that the main problem that we have is that there's a huge lack of knowledge. If more developers knew from the start how important this aspect is, this problem will be long gone, because it's actually very, very simple to solve it. And when you see the example, you're going to see, oh, yeah, he was right. It's quite easy to do it that way. But if we think ahead and think our applications in terms of accessibility, if we build a 10 years a project, huge project, and then you want to solidly change it, that's going to take so much more time. So let's talk a little bit about WCAG. I call it WCAG because in Spanish that's how we pronounce it, but you can call it WCAG or however you think it better. And basically this, what it says is that the standard is divided by 4 principles: perceivable, operable, understandable, and robust. Each of these principles is divided by guidelines that explain you, like in an abstract way, how you should be dealing with certain scenarios. And then you have success criteria, which are things like a little bit more concrete, so you can actually follow steps. They even have suggestions, examples, so there's a lot of content inside WCAG that can be really helpful for you. So I know I just said about a bunch of things, a lot of principles, a lot of words. So basically what we have to know is that we have 4 principles that are divided by 13 guidelines and 78 success criteria. So what this means is that if you want to be 100% WCAG compliant, you have to meet 78 success criteria. And that's not easy at all. And also, we have to take into account that these criteria are also categorized by level. The levels are A, AA, and AAA, where A is the lowest and AAA is the highest conformance level. So when you say that your app is AAA, you're basically saying that you met all the 78 success criteria. So section 508, as I said, is a policy enforced by the US government. It states that all federal offices, electronic and information technology services should be accessible to people with disabilities. The policy is based on global standards from the W3C, or the World Wide Web Consortium. Experts say that being conformant with WCAG AA is a very acceptable, accessible level. Even though this is specific to the US, a lot of countries started doing their own initiative to enforce accessibility in their electronic information technology services. So whether you are in the US or not, you better be prepared, because anytime in your country there will be a policy about this. So assuming that AA is what you want, that in your country that's enough for saying that your application is accessible. So if that's what you're aiming for, you need to meet 58 of the whole 78 criteria. That means 20 less. And depending on your application's content and application functionalities, there are criteria that don't even apply to you. In one project I worked on a while back now, we had to meet only 38 of the criteria. So we had to meet less than half in order to be AA compliant. So this could be your case. So WAI-ARIA. So WAI-ARIA used to scare me a lot, and it turns out it's the coolest thing ever. It's another standard to help you build more accessible interactions. They have a bunch of patterns of things that you can do to make your applications better in terms of accessibility and usability. It comes out of the box with HTML5, meaning that you don't need to install anything extra, you don't have to do anywhere stuff, so you have everything ready as soon as you start developing with HTML. It basically gives you a ton of properties, states, and things, and whatever that you can attach to your interactive elements to provide an improved experience for users with assistive technologies. HTML comes with a lot of native elements to give users a better experience. If you need something custom, there's an authoring practice guide from ARIA describing almost 30 of the most common widgets that you can find. So a lot of things like trees and tabs and accordions and all those things are very well explained there with examples, with pitfalls, with a bunch of things that will really help you improve how you're building your applications today. One important thing is that a lot of people, I read this a lot, is that no ARIA is better than bad ARIA. If you put the wrong values in your ARIA things, you're gonna end up making a worse experience. So unless you know what you're doing or you're following what the authoring guide says, don't be creative. I mean, don't try to do something or assume things. Please research first, because you could end up doing things even worse. So assistive technologies basically is any device or software that enhance the disabled user's experience while using electronic and information technology services. So for example, alphabet boards for help people that can speak, braille keyboards, screen readers, and much more. The one I'm more used to work with is screen readers. There are multiple options available. There is NVDA, there's JAWS, there's VoiceOver. Out of those, I recommend using NVDA, mainly because it's open source, so it's free. So that's the one I use. I work using Linux, and it doesn't work in Linux. So if you're a Linux user like me, you'll need to use a virtual machine or something like that to get around it. And navigation. This is one of the things that blew my mind when I started with this entire topic. And basically navigation. So it turns out that us, as visually enabled users, we navigate through the web in a specific way. So we follow things like the boldness of a text, the size of a text. Those are the things that attract our attention. Also images. So as we can see here, basically there's a lot. This is like a heat map of where the eye goes when they're looking at this precise site, and you can see that basically there's there's more red towards the image, toward titles and things like that. So we, as visually enabled users, have a specific way to navigate through the content. But when we get to visually impaired users, things change a lot. So they don't see the size of the text, they don't see the image, they don't see if it is bold or not. So in this case, you have to do different strategies in order to help them or provide them with the information they need to build this mental map. So basically, what I understood, I'm visually enabled, so I don't really know how this experience is, but I've seen a lot of blind users talking about this, and they basically say they create a mental map of the content of the site. So in order for them to be able to do that, we need to definitely help them by providing them with all the content they need. So for this, HTML is here to the rescue. So almost everything that comes out of the box with HTML is already accessible. So as long as you stick to using the components created by HTML, the native ones, you should be closer to an accessible application. So that's the first thing. Try to use HTML as much as you can. And if you're going to build something custom, try to follow WAI-ARIA authoring practices. So this is a very simple example. So basically, HTML gives us buttons, it gives us forms, inputs, links, and a bunch of stuff that's so much, it's highly accessible by default. So you don't have to pay any more attention, you just have to make sure to use the things that I already provided to you. So screen readers, remember that I told you there's a mental model the blind users build in order to navigate properly through the content. So this mental map is built upon the headings. So headings are important. So H1, H2, H3, they don't mean size. They don't mean that H1 is bigger or smaller. It's not a size thing. It's more regarding a hierarchy. So H1 is like the parent of all your headings, and as you go down and start using H2, what you're saying is this H2 are like children of this H1, and so on. So you have to use headings. If you don't use headings, the user won't see this tree here. So this is what the screen reader tells to the user. That's what they are reading to the user. So if you don't have headings, this will be entirely empty. So users won't be able to do anything. Basically, the role of Angular is that it has been allowing developers to build more dynamic and reactive applications. They have changed the rules of the game, basically. By abstracting all the heavy lifting, it's possible to create SPA applications, single-page applications, without too much effort. It also gives us features we can use to make applications that are component-oriented, and these components are reusable. And even though that's a lot of power, it can make it harder to build accessible applications. So what's the thing about components? I love components, and if you're doing Angular, you probably love them too. It's so easy to create reusable components you can use in your templates that could make you think. Instead of using a button element, I just create a custom element with a link using a div, right? I mean, many of us has done that before. And even though you can do it, I wouldn't recommend to rewrite any native elements because they come with a lot of functionalities that you will need to build on your own then. So there are a lot of things that come out of the box that you won't have it, and you will need to re-implement them yourself. Since components can be reused and they can be put in any context without any constraint, besides the modules, you have to be extremely careful, because if you have headings inside a component and then you put it somewhere else, the tree that I just showed you will end up all messed up. So you have to make sure that you are using the components that have headings, that you're using them in the right context. Next we have headings. As I said, headings are the most important things when you're making accessible web applications. Maybe it's not the most important, but it's one of the most important to me. And according to a survey made by the WAI-ARIA team to screen reader users, there's almost 80% of the respondents find headings useful when navigating content. So we're saying that 80% of screen reader users who took this survey say that headings are key for them to do a proper navigation through the content. So yeah, they're very, very important. And just watch out, try not to jump between H1 to H3 or things like that, or from H2 to H1, anything like that. Try to avoid them, try to keep the hierarchy properly designed. And next we have paragraphs. All applications have text content. Like if you write an essay, a book, or whatever, you divide that content in paragraphs to make it easier for users to understand or perceive the information you're trying to transmit, to transfer to them. So basically, if we make our content just a wall of text inside a p tag, let's say we have a p tag and we put inside of it an interpolation, and we put just a text there, a string, it could have multiple paragraphs, and you can figure out a way to split them. But if you don't split them, each paragraph in a p element in the HTML, what you're making your users is that screen readers users won't be able to jump between paragraphs. So if they miss something, if they want to repeat something, they have to start from the beginning. So I highly recommend you to not do this and try your best to create a p tag for each of your paragraphs. I have an article about it using ngTemplate context, just like Cooper said, and basically it helps you doing all these things. I also have a pipe I already created to do this easier, so there's a bunch of solutions for this. And finally, the SPA navigation. This navigation is very cool. Like when I started doing Angular, I was like, whoa, this is amazing. So basically, we mock the navigation, we fix stuff, we make them feel like they're navigating, but they're not because this is in SPA. So I was at the beginning so amazed by it. But then I knew that browsers and screen readers are expecting the navigation to work in a certain way. So if you decide to do an SPA or start using Angular without server-side rendering, what you end up is having a navigation that doesn't follow standards and it might be broken. So I know there's a lot of people doing a lot of research around this, trying to figure out the best way to implement a proper SPA navigation. Right now, using Angular 9, you can have a few things. You can attach a few things to your router, and you can do some stuff with the Angular CDK in order to take your mock navigation to the next level, so users with screen readers can also use it. So that's it about the talk. So before I finish, I want to show this little example. So I created this very simple application in which I created a reusable button, and I developed it in 3 different ways: a bad way, a okay way, and the way I would recommend. So if we look at this, basically what we have here is that this is the template of the bad button. So we give it, I'm using a div, so never do this, especially for native elements. So I'm using a div, and I'm giving it a class of button. I'm attaching to it a click handler, so I'm able to click it, and also key down, so I can interact with the button through pressing the space keyboard, the space key in the keyboard, or enter. And finally, a roll button. This is the only, like, one of the few ARIA stuff that you see here, and what it tells to the browser is that this div is not actually a div but a button for screen readers, so they can see when they get to that, instead of reading just the text that you put inside of it, it will read, it will tell to user button and the text. Okay, so now the component itself. So first, I'm using the view child decorator to get a reference to the button. I'm creating an input property. Basically, the idea is that you can have a primary or a secondary button, and a disable property. So I can have a disable option, and an event emitter just to send a message back up when the button is pressed, either to click or a key press. Next, I have to, in the constructor, I have to inject the renderer too. This way I can modify the DOM in a performant way. And what we do here is that once after the viewing it, basically what this lifecycle means is that once the template is rendered, I want to execute this code. So what I'm doing is that I'm adding a new class to the element of button and its type, whether it's primary or secondary. Then I'm giving it another class of disable or enable, depending on whether or not the value of the disable is. And finally, I'm setting an attribute to tab index. So if the item is disabled, I don't want to be able to tab. So if we come here, I press tab and this one is focused. I press tab again, now this one is focused, and when I tab again, it is skipped. So there we are. So finally, the event handlers on click and on key down, this is very straightforward, right? And this is a lot of code, like a lot of things to understand. You have to use the render, you have to do a lot of stuff. Since I don't have much time, I'm going to skip the good button, I'm going to go straight to the best button. So this is the same implementation. I don't have a template, I don't have anything else. So my template is just an ng content. But instead of using an element component, I'm using an attribute component. So this way I can attach it to a bottom element. Instead of doing all the things, all the functionalities on my own, I'm gonna rely on the host of this component being a bottom element. So it has disabled state and it has a bunch of stuff already cooked up for us. So for example, now that I'm using this in the CSS, I'm able to do things like if using the selector for disable. So I can style things based on the actual bottom state instead of giving it an extra class. So as you can see here, I'm not giving any extra class for the disabled. I don't have any disabled, I don't have any pressed, I don't have a key down, because all those things are done already by HTML in the native bottom. So what I want to give to you is that you have to understand how important HTML is and how much work is there already and how many smart people have been working on that. So just use what they give us. So try your best to use it, try to do a composition of interaction patterns. So in the WAI-ARIA altering practices, there's a lot of things that can help you get started to build better and more accessible and usable interactions. And that's basically it about my example. I just wanted to know I'm going to be giving a training next week on April 8th about accessibility on Angular, and I'm planning to go through a small application and show how you can start making it more accessible by just doing small changes. And thank you everyone, and that's it for my talk, and thank you for being here. I see that there are a few questions, so let's go ahead. So this one from Guillermo, and yeah, Guillermo, at our agency we get a lot of accessibility stuff. As I said, Domino's was a trigger. Once that happened, like a lot of our customers were like, hey, we need to stop doing whatever we were doing and we have to make it accessible. So yeah, I highly recommend you to get ready for this because more people is going to need this in the future. Another question also from Guillermo is that, so WCAG is international and section 508 is USA only? Yes. So WCAG is a guideline made by the W3C, and this is basically for all over the world. And since section 508 didn't want to reinvent the wheel and write all those standards again, they basically just based their policy on that. So if you go to the entire 508 policy, you'll see that they explain that WCAG is the place you have to go to. And so LinkedIn roles, also by Guillermo. I think Guillermo is interested about accessibility. And well, I have to figure that out. And if you want to, you can go ahead on Twitter and write me and we can chat about it. I don't have anything on hand that I can show you right away, but I know there's quite a few things about it. So if you want to, just drop me a message and I will gladly get into a chat and see what we can do. And that was all the questions. Is there anybody else has any other question? I'm gonna give it a minute. So, well, I think we're done for today. We have no more questions. Thank you everybody for being here. Thank you, Steven, for being here with us and talking about ngTemplate outlet, ngTemplateOutlet. Thank you very much. Thank you everybody, and join our talks. Remember that we have a lot of much events, and feel free to go to this.media Twitter account and ask for any of our events. See you later in another session. Bye.
Bye.